Hi y'all, Miss Wall here to show you how to make sourdough from a sourdough starter. So let's head on into the kitchen and get started. This is my starter. The starter has yeast, the bacteria, and flour and water in it to help it stay alive and stay ready to make my dough. I fed this around 12 hours ago, so you can see this was my starting point, and the dough is not quite, or the starter is not quite double that. It was double at about 8 hours while I was sleeping, and now it has started to lower back down. So that just means the yeast are becoming less active. You can still see some of the bubbles, but the starter has reached its peak point and now it's coming back down. So it is not ready to make bread. That means I need to feed it again. So I did a lot of research on this last night, and I need to feed it a 1:1:1 ratio. So I'm going to do 75 grams of starter, 75 grams of water, and 75 grams of yeast. And then hopefully in the next 4 to 10 hours, this starter, not this one, but the one that I make that I feed, is going to grow to over double, and then that means it'll be ready for bread. So I'm going to show you how to feed my starter. So I need a scale and another mason jar. I'm going to turn that on and then zero out my scale with the mason jar on it so that when I add everything, I'm only getting those ingredients. So what I'll need is my starting, some water, and I have all-purpose flour here. I haven't done this yet, so I don't know if all-purpose flour is going to work very well, but we're going to give it a try. So I'm going to measure out 75 grams of each, just by placing that right into 76. So I'm going to do that amount of flour and then that amount of water as well. That's 75, 77 actually grams of my starter. And now 75 grams of flour. And I guess I should go to 154. It's going to be perfect 1:1. There. So now I have 75 grams of starter, 75 grams of flour. You got it right. We want 75 grams of water. That'll put me at 225 total. Water is a lot more dense than flour, so it's not going to take as much to get 75 grams. Okay, we're at 225. I'm going to add just a little bit more since I did add a little bit more starter. 2 grams. Great. Now I have my water, 75 grams, flour, 75 grams, and starter, 75 grams. I'm going to give that a good mix. We want all of that to get mixed up for feeding our yeast and bacteria, feeding our sourdough starter. And I usually just do it until all of that powdery flour is not visible anymore. Looks good. Get as much of that in there as possible. It is very goopy. And then I'm going to take my rubber band from my other mason jar, and I learned this from a woman on YouTube. I think her name is Sophie. And I'm going to place it where that sourdough starter starts, so that when it gets double that, I know that it's ready for making my dough. So thanks for joining. We'll be back in either 4 to 10 hours when this guy is ready to go and active and bubbly and making lots of good fermentation so that it can then ferment our sourdough. It has been 4 hours, and you can see that the yeast starter has grown in size about 20 or 30%. So it's been 4 hours. We want this to double, so maybe another 4 hours before I can make my dough with it. My starter has risen past the halfway point. It has been around 7 hours. So now that it's past the halfway point, we can test it by taking a tablespoon and putting it into water. And if it floats, that means the yeast is active enough to make my dough. I'm just going to drop that in carefully. And you can see that it's floating. Oops, it's floating nicely in there, which means that my starter is ready to mix. So I found a recipe online, and it's 150 grams of starter. I have my flour here. It's 500 grams of flour, 25 grams of olive oil. It says it makes a nice crust. 250 grams of water and 10 grams of salt. So I'll need my scale again. And we're going to measure that out. So again, I want to zero my scale, and then I will mix this all together. So 150 grams of my starter. Probably gonna have to use most of this. Right, we hit 150 grams of my starter. I have more in the fridge, so I'll just discard that. Next is 500 grams of flour. So do some math. 150 plus 500. I'm gonna stop the math at 600. And 50. 650. Awesome. So that's my flour. Move that to the side. Next is water. I'm at 250 grams now. I need 250 grams of water, so that's going to be 900 grams total. So I'm going to carefully pour this in here until we get to 900. Okay, stop at 901. So a gram too much, but I think it'll be okay. 10 grams of salt. That was only 1 gram. 2 grams. There we go. And lastly is the 25 grams of olive oil. I might have to stop and get an extra one. So 25 will put us at 935. Okay, so that is all of my ingredients. I'm going to move this to the side. I went back and read my recipe, and I was supposed to whisk the starter and the water together first. Did not do that, but it'll turn out okay. I'm just going to whisk it all together now. Try not to spill any of it. No. like it's time to use my hand. I'm just going to use my hand. I'm supposed to mix this until it gets well mixed, and then I let it sit for 30 minutes. I think it's okay that all the flour's falling out. Looks okay to me. Now I'm supposed to let it sit for 30 minutes. Okay, so it's been 30 minutes, and this is what my dough looks like. It said I have the option of taking it and folding it over itself, but since I did it wrong to start, I don't know how it's going to turn out, so I'm not going to put in that extra effort. It says to cover it and let it ferment for anywhere for 3 to 12 hours until it's doubled in size. So I'd say doubling in size would be it taking up the majority of this bowl and rising over to the top. So I'll be back in a bit once this has maybe risen, maybe not, we'll see. I did feed a new starter, so if it does mess up, I have another one going that I will do correctly next time. See you soon. I made my dough about 5 hours ago, and it's expanding outward instead of upward. So I'll give you a look. It is much rounder than before. I think it's going okay. So I'm going to do the fold over that I read about online. So I'm supposed to grab the edges and pull them up and then over to the other side. And I'm supposed to rotate it and do that again until I've made it all the way around. It is quite sticky, and so this will be my last fold over. This is just supposed to add some air to the middle. Looks good. So I'll check back in with it. It has grown. I'm probably going to make this in the morning because it is now 9 o'clock. Okay, it's been another 12 hours since I last did this. Yes. My dough has risen a lot. I actually put it in the fridge because the recipe I was looking at said that the dough should be in room temperature for 12 hours max, and I didn't want it to over ferment, so I put it in the fridge because another recipe said you could do that for up to 15. So now is the last rise. So I'm going to shape this guy and then put it on a baking sheet. I don't have a Dutch oven that can go in the oven, so baking sheet is going to have to do with a thing of water underneath. So I watched a few videos on how to shape my dough. I don't have a fancy bread tool, so we'll see how it goes. I'm supposed to pop it down on some flour. Bring that puppy down. It's very sticky. Came out. And then I'm supposed to move it to an area that doesn't have much flour and spread it out. And then I watched a video that had them fold it into thirds. So thirds. And then tip that one all the way over. And then I kind of spin it around like this to make a nice try to make a nice loaf. And I'm not supposed to overwork the dough, so I'd say that looks pretty good. So here's my loaf. I'm supposed to let this rest for another hour, so I'm going to plop it on my baking sheet. And we'll be back in 1 hour. It's been about an hour, so I have preheated my oven to 400. I've preheated a skillet because I've been reading online and the skillet, cast iron skillet's actually better than the type of baking sheet I have. So I preheated that, and there's also been a bowl of water similar to this in the oven as well for about 10 minutes to get some steam going, because it's good to steam the bread before baking it. So I have my bread on parchment paper. I am going to leave it on parchment paper just because I'm not sure how well it'll work without it. And there's my bread ready to bake for around 30 minutes with the steam, and then 30 minutes without. I'm using a couple different recipes, so I'll just have to check on it a lot. And then it said to cook it with the oven door open for the last 10 minutes. So here we go. The bread is almost ready. You can see I have my oven cracked. The recipe called for doing that in the last 10 minutes so it gets a nice crust. I used the water in the bottom for the first 35 minutes of cooking, and then pulled that out and set it for another 20 minutes to bake without that. And then I've had this open for about 8 minutes now, so around 55 minutes of baking total. I think that works, so I'll pull it out in a sec. Here is my sourdough loaf. Here is my sourdough loaf. It looks pretty good. A little lighter than I've seen, but I don't want to overcook it. It says to let it sit for another hour before I get to enjoy it. So stay tuned for the cutting of the bread. It's time to see how my bread turned out. I let it sit on a rack to cool for approximately an hour and 40-ish minutes, and I don't want to wait any longer, so I'm going to cut this open and we'll see how it is. Looks pretty good. It's a little moist, but I think it's cooked through. It looks like bread should look. I'm gonna give it a taste. Not bad. It's a little more dense than I would like, but it did rise a lot, which is good. I'd say it's a successful first try. I will put the recipe in the description if you'd like to give it a try. And I'll make a second video where I do things more correctly and see if it gets better. Hope you enjoyed this. Have a great Friday. Eat some bread, it's the best.